Hello and welcome to Frontrunner Motorsport. And today was the Bahrainian Grand Prix. Was it a boring dud like last week? Kind of. It wasn't the most stimulating Grand Prix ever, but it was probably better than Japan. Bahrain's never been a great track, at least in my view. I honestly can think of very few exciting moments from a Bahrain Grand Prix. I don't think Sakhir's a great track. It's just, if your track has two set overtaking places, the first corner and the fourth, and anywhere else it will depend on tyre wear and just if the car in front is slower than you. That's not a good track. I'm not saying you have to be able to overtake at every corner, but I do believe the possibility should be there. And at Bahrain, you just see very little overtaking outside of the first corner and the fourth, and even then, not really that much. This, I felt, was slightly interesting because there were points in this race where we weren't necessarily seeing the big gaps we sometimes get in Formula 1. We did eventually. Piastri won by about 15 seconds. But you had Norris and Russell quite close together. Leclerc wasn't that far behind. Hamilton wasn't a million miles behind. Pierre Gasly, great job from him this weekend. I think he got a penalty though. Or I think he dropped behind Verstappen right at the end for some reason, but he did a great job all weekend, and he wasn't that far off Hamilton really. Closer than an Alpine should be, or you'd imagine an Alpine to be. So I think there is something that cars aren't necessarily getting lapped, and we're not getting super huge gaps that will just, you're just not going to see them get filled. And that is a positive. We're still not seeing a lot of overtaking, and the cars aren't running that close together. There's still gaps, it's just they're not massive. Overtaking's a problem because that's... Yeah, you want overtakes, basically. And we're not getting that. We haven't had that in the last two Grand Prix at least. I guess China was a little better. But we are getting a mixed up grid. The fast cars aren't necessarily fast at every race. The teams sort of seem to be taking turns to have issues and gremlins. Except McLaren, who are flying. There's performances I could pick out and say, Oscar Piastri all weekend, fantastic job. Controlled this race with ease, stunning in qualifying. He got the win, pole and fastest lap. It's a clean sweep for the weekend for him, basically. And, George Russell, again, second place. He's right up at the front, doing a really good job for Mercedes. Mercedes look like they're in a good place this year. Lando Norris on the podium at every race so far. Max Verstappen didn't have the car under him, but still managed to get a decent enough 6th place finish. You could call that a champion's drive, where even if he hasn't got the performance, he's still scoring decent enough points. It keeps him up there at the moment. And honestly, Leclerc, again, he deserved a podium, but he didn't get it. But it was another good drive from him all weekend. He was up at the front for pretty much all the race, started to drop away at the end. A lot of cars throughout the weekend had issues, a lot of issues with DRS. George Russell seemed to be having a lot of strange issues. I don't really know what was happening at Red Bull. It's just, they just didn't have any pace. But again, we saw Max Verstappen was struggling throughout the first half of his race, but was doing better in the second half. And Yuki Tsunoda, a couple of places behind him, doing a good job, scoring the first points for the second Red Bull this year. He got into Q3 as well. So it's an improvement, and he's getting there. Another few races, and we might see maybe some top 5 finishes for the second Red Bull, hopefully. A lot of that's going to depend on qualifying as well, but at least Yuki did get into Q3 this time. At least he did finish 9th. He's at least matching what he was doing in the Racing Bull. So that's an improvement on Lawson, who wasn't getting out of Q1 and was struggling in the races. It's going to take time, and I think they have to be patient with him. Yuki was involved in the one bit of contact where he did make contact with Carlos Sainz and damage Sainz's car. Sainz eventually retired. The only retirement, but I do think it was right not to give Yuki a penalty. I think it's just two cars very close together. Other than that, there's a lot of chaos with tyres. A lot of cars made a lot of pit stops. I think Kimi Antonelli made 3 pit stops that didn't really work out for him. But there were other cars who went through their tyres very quickly. The hard tyre didn't seem to work very well, and the medium tyre just didn't seem to last. And the soft actually was probably the best tyre here. And that was interesting. It still doesn't mix up the pit strategies enough, and so we tend to just get status quo. Red Bull having issues at their pit stops is very unlike them, but the first 2 pit stops they had issues with their lights, and then it was a slow tyre coming off of Verstappen, delayed him. So you think Verstappen got delayed twice in the pit stops. That would probably be enough to close the gap to 5th. I think he must have lost around about 5 seconds. And that is very damaging over the course of a race. Obviously, that's essentially a penalty. So Red Bull are in a very strange place. Their car seems to be very difficult at the moment. It does seem to be a case of, in the second half of the race, it comes alive, but we just can't navigate the first half of the race to get it into a position. At least that's been the case at China and Bahrain specifically. Japan, obviously, Max did a very good job taking the win, and he was second in Australia, but there's something about the balance of that car that does strike me as very strange. As for the rest of the field, Lewis Hamilton, good job coming from 9th to 5th. We had Max Verstappen behind him. Gasly, again, fantastic weekend for him. Piastri is my driver of the week, but I think Gasly and Doohan in the Alpines second. Doohan very unlucky not to be in the points. I think he was caught out on bad tyres later in the race, but he was in the top 10 for a lot of it. He did a fantastic job in qualifying as well. Alpine seem to have found a little something, which is surprising because they've been pretty bad for the last few years. But Gasly in 7th gets their first points finish of the year. Esteban Ocon in 8th, another good performance for Haas. Oliver Behrman was in the points as well in 10th, sandwiching Yuki Tsunoda. Double points result for Haas. That's what they want. It's good. Esteban Ocon's in the top 10 in the championship at the moment, so that's really about where Haas would want to be, I think. It's about where their performances are. Outside of the points, you had Andrea Kimi Antonelli. Again, I think he got screwed over by tyres. Alexander Albon, another decent performance, but he was outpaced by Carlos Sainz a lot through this weekend, so he might be a little bit disappointed. Isaac Hadjar, decent enough, probably where you'd expect him to finish. He's ahead of Lawson, that's the main thing. Jack Doohan had a great race, dropped back at the end. Fernando Alonso, completely invisible, barely saw him. Same goes for Lance Stroll. Liam Lawson, same, didn't really see much of him, didn't really do very much. Gabriel Bortoleto, 18th. About what you expect from Stake Sauber at the moment. And Nico Hulkenberg got disqualified for some reason, which I don't actually know about, but it doesn't really make much of a difference anyway. And for the championship, it's interesting. We have Lando Norris 3 points ahead of Oscar Piastri. So McLaren are dominating at the top, but Max Verstappen is only 8 points behind Norris, and George Russell's only 14 points behind him. So the top 4 of the championship are just 14 points apart. It's been interesting watching the cars sort of move up and down the field at the first 4 races. As I said, Red Bull have been surprisingly inconsistent. George Russell is doing a good job, but I think he is overperforming in the Mercedes. And the McLarens are definitely the cars to beat this year. Behind them, you've got Charles Leclerc, Andrea Kimi Antonelli, Lewis Hamilton falling away a little bit. And then you've got Alexander Albon, Ocon and Stroll in the top 10. With Gasly, Hulkenberg, Behrman, Tsunoda, Hadjar, Sainz, all just outside it with points. Alonso, no points so far. Lawson, no points. Doohan, no points. And Bortoleto, no points. It's an interesting championship. McLaren are running away with the constructors, but I don't think it's a done deal. I think the development race over the course of the year is going to be interesting. I think the championship is more interesting than the races, last couple of races at least. As I said, the Bahrain Grand Prix was better than Japan. Still not incredible, but we'll see. We've got Saudi Arabia next weekend. It might just be a case that I am feeling a little bit of Formula 1 fatigue. I feel like the season's just started, and yet we've had a lot of races so far. And next weekend's another one. We'll see how Saudi Arabia is. I do think it's a slightly better track than Bahrain. Again, I don't really think it's amazing, but it's going to be interesting to see if McLaren can keep this pace up, if Mercedes can still be up and amongst the top teams, if Red Bull can sort out some of their balance issues, if Ferrari can get themselves into gear, because Ferrari still haven't had a podium yet this year. Haas and Williams, 5th and 6th in the Constructors, is brilliant for them. Can they keep that up? They seem to be scoring regular points at least. And then the rest of the field, Aston Martin, Racing Bulls, Alpine, Kick Sauber, they're struggling, but they have all scored points, and it's all very, very close in the second half of the field. It's an interesting season, even if the races aren't very interesting, and that is a positive, I suppose. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Did you enjoy the Bahrainian Grand Prix? Who was your driver of the race? Why was it Oscar Piastri? Thank you very much for watching. Make sure you subscribe, and have a good one.